Well, hello everyone and good afternoon. It's so nice to be with you here today. My name is Peter Caborn. I'm the Associate Vice President for Alumni Affairs and Advancement Services at Wayne State. I also serve as the Executive Director of the Wayne State University Alumni Association. Because our event today is via Zoom, I do have a couple of housekeeping items for our Zoom meeting. I'd like to ask everyone and encourage everyone to introduce yourselves with your name and graduation year or Wayne State affiliation. You can use the chat box for that. We will keep everyone muted during today's presentation and conversation, but I do want to encourage dialogue via the chat box. And I also want to encourage you to use the chat box to note any questions that you have. We will do our best to keep an eye on the chat box for questions and to field as many of those questions during today's program as we can. With that, I'd like to introduce our panel moderator, Dr. Stephanie Hawks. Dr. Hawks is the Assistant Director of the Office of Multicultural Student Engagement here at Wayne State. And I'm thrilled that she's with us. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Hawks now. We're happy to have her. She will be moderating our panel and will now introduce our guests. Dr. Hawks.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Peter, for that introduction, and good afternoon to everyone here in attendance. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation, the diversity, equity, and inclusion and generational discussion. And so I will, before we dive into introducing our panelists, and you can advance to the next slide, I do want to start with our land acknowledgement. Oh, I don't know. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and read it. So Wayne State University rests on Waiuwatanog, also referred to as Detroit, the ancestral and contemporary homeland of the Three Fires Confederacy. These sovereign lands were granted by the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Wyandot nations in 1807 through the Treaty of Detroit. Wayne State University affirms Indigenous sovereignty and honors all tribes with a connection to Detroit. With our Native neighbors, Wayne State can advance educational equity and promote a better future for the earth and all people. So we like to start all of our presentations with that. Just again, this session will be really interactive, and so I'll be monitoring the chat as well. If you'd like to just share, if you knew the names of the tribes, of the people who occupied this land, you could put yes or no. So with that, we'll go ahead and move into a brief discussion of what OMSE is and our role here. So the Office of Multicultural Student Engagement is really here to create a safe campus environment where we're valuing, celebrating, and promoting the different identities among us on campus. Wayne State is the most diverse campus in Michigan, and so we definitely want to celebrate that. We'll also, by also doing programming that makes sure that our populations are being served as best they can be. We do that through our collaborations with campus and the community, again, to deliver those programs and services to make sure that our students thrive during their time here. You can go to the next slide. And we do that through three different kinds of foci. So the first is through cultural identity programming. So we do that through our celebration of different heritage months. So for example, Native American Heritage Month, African American History Month, LGBTQ related things, so like Pride Month, Pride or Coming Out Week, those types of things. We also do that by offering workshops and trainings to our students on campus. So those who serve in student leadership roles, we offer trainings to them so that they can best, again, meet the needs of our students here at Wayne State. We offer things, sessions such as microaggressions, social and personal identities, so on and so forth. And then lastly, we do offer two retention-focused learning communities. So one is RISE, which is for self-identified women of color, and the Network, which is for African-American men. So we have a lot going on, and we want to make sure that we're creating a really inclusive environment for all of our students here at Wayne State. So We're here today, though, to have a conversation and a generational discussion on some important issues. And so I'd like to start off by introducing our wonderful panelists. So first we have Dr. Marquita Chamblee, who is the Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion and our Chief Diversity Officer. We have Riya Chhabra, our Student Senate President, who's majoring in Public Health and Neuroscience. Kamali Clora, a Director of Student Services for Student Senate, co-majoring in Public Health Honors and University Honors with a minor in music, which Kamali will have to figure out what you're so musically inclined in, because I appreciated that. And lastly, we have Dr. Leonard Savala, our Director of the Office of Multicultural Student Engagement. So we'll have a conversation with our panelists, but I'm also encouraging those of you in the audience to have a conversation in the chat. So in all of our events in this virtual environment, you know, we've learned that there's some unique opportunities for us to communicate with one another. And so the chat is one of those great ways for us to do so. So I'm looking forward to the panel discussion that's occurring in the chat as we talk about some of these questions for our panelists. As a reminder, you know, if you do have questions or comments or responses, or if you want to heart, do the reactions, feel free. But, you know, that'll help encourage some dialogue between not only our panelists, but you and the audience. So, oh, everyone's hot, great. So we're here to have this discussion. And so, you know, when we think about a generational approach to discussing issues, we're fortunate enough to have on our panel representation from 4 generations. So we have the gamut here, and we also, I would venture to say, looking at the chat and the years that are represented here, we have a wealth of experience and backgrounds in our audience. And so when we think about generations and what defines a generation is often moments, events, things that have had a significant impact on how we live our lives, how we view the world, how we know ourselves as individuals. And I would venture to say that the events that happened this summer surrounding the murder of George Floyd and the resulting protests and just movements for the Black Lives Matter, I think has a generational impact, not only for the students who are, you know, in college now, but I would say all generations. So I'd like to start us off, and this is also open to our audience, is to talk about any thoughts or feelings that you had as we witnessed this kind of, I know we keep saying the word unprecedented, but this unprecedented social movement that we saw last summer. So just any thoughts or reactions to that?
I mean, I think for me, the power of it was in the international response. I mean, you know, it was immediate. And, you know, as the older folk of the boomer generation on this panel, I think about, you know, some of the ways that things happened, you know, back in the day, and the response that happened as a result of George Floyd in this day with social media, with the opportunity for something so heinous to be seen so broadly and experienced so up close and personal and shared so widely. I think the power of that was different than some of the traumatic events that happened, you know, back in my day. And so I think it's been really powerful to see how the movement has grown just through the power of social media versus word of mouth, or, you know, and the ability to see and connect instantly. I think is what made it powerful for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think witnessing it on such a broad level, like you said, that access to being able to see so many things is definitely, I think, a memorable way to just kind of capture it, but I think it'll be forever captured, honestly, when we think about it. Anyone else want to share their thoughts? I'm also encouraging those in the chat. If you feel like you want to talk more about sort of what Marquita was alluding to, issues or topics that were really important while you were in college, you can also share that in the chat.
I wanted to mention of what Dr. Chamblee was saying about even in the response, it was an international response. It wasn't just, you know, Black population, out there protesting or raising voices, but it was everyone. It was your next door neighbors, people you know, people you've seen from all different ethnic backgrounds. And I think that in itself held a different power, just because it was really spread magnitude throughout these like this.
I think that we're having some technical issues with Kamali, but I think I was hearing him say things such as, you know, witnessing it on the global scale, seeing it on more of a community engagement level where we're seeing our neighbors, our business owners, being more involved in some of these things. Riya, I saw you had went to unmute.
No, it was definitely very heartbreaking to witness that. I think it was very traumatic for a lot of people. And but then kind of going off what Kamali said, it was powerful to see so many people come together from so many different backgrounds. And I think that was what really helped people process something that was so traumatic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as this continues to be talked about, you know, for me, I think looking at this, it just felt different. I remember being in the moment in the summer, and granted, I'm a millennial. And for me, this felt like one of the, unfortunately, we hear these stories of Black people being killed or abused at the hands of police brutality. But for some reason, this moment felt different, even very, very early on. And for me, it was encouraging to see how long that energy was sustained. Because I remember very early on, some of the news media outlets were talking about, is this a trend? Is it just going to be something that goes away? But for me, it was just inspiring to see it be a summer sustained movement. Leah, I don't know if you wanted to add anything, and I know we might be waiting on Kamali as well.
I think, yeah, the global response, but also someone that looks at history a little bit. You know, I reflected on that a lot as well. I think the range of emotions went from grief at one point to directly to relief, from despair to hope, you know, from the death of George Floyd to the kids in the cages. You know, my heart has felt heavy all summer regarding all of these issues and atrocities that have been going on. And then, you know, I was thinking about, you know, a couple of the authors that I've, you know, read over the years. And one of the came to mind was Nikki Giovanni. And she says that, you know, everything will change. The only question is growth or decaying. And I said, you know, that for me was something like, you know, I think as I reflect, you know, again, on all of these challenges, you know, I do see growth. I see a place where we are growing as a nation and hopefully learning. And I think, you know, one of the other quotes that kind of hit me was a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. And he says, you know, human progress is neither automatic or inevitable. Every step towards the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertions and passions, concerns of dedicated individuals. And I think we've seen that. And it's kind of interesting, like when you read something and then you look at our current state, right? And it gives it some sort of perspective. And for me, that's what it did.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing those quotes. Kamali, welcome back. I know we lost a little bit of what you were saying. I don't know if you want to pick back up. Oh no, I think he's still frozen. So we'll hear back from Kamali later. But again, I encourage you all in the audience, you can put in the chat thoughts that you had about the summer or things that were kind of those defining moments for you when you were in college. And we'll continue to take a look at that. So, okay, Kamali's here. Do you want to go ahead and add your thoughts? I know we were talking about a little bit of what you were saying over the summer with regards to community involvement. Oh. Okay. So we'll go ahead and move to the next question. So I know we started off with quite a bit of thought with regards to one of the most defining moments I think we've witnessed amongst all generations. But we'll do a little broader question in thinking about what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? So as we witnessed some of those things with regards to protests, businesses coming out with statements on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and various responses to those protests being very visible and meaningful. Can you speak a little bit about what diversity, equity, and inclusion means to you? And again, audience members, you can chime in too in the chat.
I would say to me, that means feeling accepted. That's kind of the first word that comes to mind. Feeling accepted for who you are. Just being in a safe space where you have that community that supports you and where you feel at home. That's kind of the first thing that I think of when I think about diversity and inclusion specifically. And then in terms of equity, I kind of think of equal opportunity, just making sure that everyone has that fair chance from the start and providing them with the resources they need to have that equal opportunity. And it might be different resources for different people, but they all should still have like that equal starting point. And then diversity, I think, just means different people coming together to learn more and grow together. So to learn more about each other and then grow as a community.
Thanks, Riya. Can everyone hear me okay? I had to switch devices there. But yeah,
so.
For me, awesome. So for me, when I think of like diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's really about like acknowledging difference and celebrating difference and like eliminating barriers to elevate voices, because there's a lot of things that preclude people from being able to speak upon these troubles or issues that we try to address as an institution, as a society, to better support people. And so with this whole thing being said, for me, it's about really including others at the table. And that's how we approach and create more inclusive solutions to problems. And all these things culminate into being able to really realize it's a fine line between cultural competency and cultural humility. And I think of cultural humility as being able to just constantly seek growth and knowledge of others' differences. And so being able to approach thinking that way and some sort of growth mindset to be able to say, hi, I'm looking at your perspective. Let me take that approach and let's figure out things that way.
I love that, cultural humility. You're also getting some props in the chat, Kamali. It's important to consider the disability community when we think of DEI too. Thank you for sharing that.
I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot I could conceivably add to what Riya and Kamali said. I mean, I think I totally agree. And when I think about it, from the university perspective, because I think about it all the time, it's really about how we also engage the full university community in doing this work. So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's really understanding that it's all of our responsibilities to be engaged in the work of making this an inclusive space, of making this a welcoming and an equitable space for people. And so I think, you have units like my office and like OMSE and like other places, but it really is, how do we engage the full university community, including our alums, in thinking about what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean, and what does it look like on our campus? And I think that's the piece that I want folks thinking about as they go about their daily lives. What does this mean for me from a DEI perspective on our campus in the work that I do, so that people are constantly thinking about that as how we build community together, I think.
All right, go ahead, Leo.
As I think about of that a little bit, the first things that come to mind for me is just philosophy and a way of life, how you live your life as you think about diversity and inclusion. And I also think about things like, it has to be a fabric built into the fabric of your structure, of your, where you live, where you work, everything that you do. It's like what's a good analogy? It's like a fabric in a quilt, or maybe it's several fabrics in a quilt, right? And it's built in there. It's just part of that. I also see it like, I've often talked about diversity on campus in the sense that I want to help everyone cultivate their own diversity gardens on campus, right? Own spaces where they're kind of growing and developing and creating these beautiful spaces where folks kind of come together in a nourishing environment. Also, so from the quilt to the philosophy of life, from the gardens, that's kind of how I know that's kind of a lot of analogies there, but I hope that kind of speaks to it.
I like both of those. I'm an avid gardener and sower crafter. So you all spoke to a lot of really good points, and I see we've got the chat has some good points in there too. And I think one of the things someone brought up, Latanya, is that I believe it's a great question to start with when there's a training session or an incident with racism. And I think in all of your points, I can hear there has to be kind of a mutual understanding of what those mean. I mean, we all come to the table with different definitions of what we think diversity, equity, and inclusion mean. But when we try to build a harmonious space, if we all think they mean different things, we can work with that, but it also might introduce kind of some challenges if we have different operating definitions of what those things mean or what they should show up as in a space. One thing I will say, Leo, that I really liked about your quilt analogy. So for those of you who do so, I've never made a quilt, but I know, within quilting, there's various parts of it that, you're piecing together different cottons usually, but piecing together different pieces to create a pattern, and then those patterns build out into larger things to create this beautiful overall work of art. But when you think about sewing too, you could quilt with any fabric, right? You could quilt with something that stretches, something that's thick and fuzzy, something that's, thin. But for each of those applications, you have to use a different technique, right? When you sew, you can't just sew everything with the same type of needle and the same type of thread and the same type of I'm just going to force this in here. You have to apply different types of techniques to make sure that they all cohesively belong and can work together. So I really like that analogy, Leo, of the quilt, is thinking about how within this beautiful tapestry of difference, to weave together this beautiful singular part of art, you have to consider the individual needs of all of those pieces to make sure that they work together harmoniously. So just looking at the chat, DEI means to me appreciating, accepting, and including everyone, encouraging learning about the differences in all of us. So yeah, absolutely. I think learning is also one of those key themes that I think runs throughout what it is that you all said.
Dr. Hawks, I just wanted to mention something what Dr. Savala said about creating spaces. Spaces are essential. And I think within those spaces, it's about normalizing tough conversations because often these tough conversations help us grow and understand these things. So that was a good point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and I think Kamali and Latanya are speaking to the same thing, is thinking about how we can allow challenging thoughts to come out. Oftentimes, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we might try to do trainings with different groups, I do think we get very uncomfortable because we're caught up with saying the wrong thing, and oh my gosh, what if I offend someone? But usually, I think in all of our experiences, despite how if you're talking about a DEI perspective or not, the most learning, I think, comes from those moments of discomfort or making mistakes, right? Not a lot of growth happens in your comfort zone. So I definitely agree with, Kamali and Latanya, and thinking about being uncomfortable is growth. So yes. So that kind of ties us into our next question, which is thinking more about the role of OMSE. So my background is in education. I have a master's degree in higher ed student affairs. And one of the things that I learned about is how often the student center and spaces within the student center can operate as kind of a third place. So they talk about places as, these pillars in your life where you're kind of moving between these spaces. So there's work and school as kind of one place, the home space. So what happened, which I think over the past year, all of these spaces have merged, but in other circumstances outside of a pandemic, you'd kind of have this work and school space, the home space, and then there's a third place, and everyone kind of has a different third place. But when we think about college students and thinking back to our own college experience, I'm going to say that OMSE kind of serves as that third place for some students, where we can talk about some of these honest conversations and difficult conversations that maybe you can't have in school or at work or at home. So I'd like to invite our panelists to talk about in what ways maybe has OMSE been that third place for you, maybe how you've interacted with our office or grown from our office. And then I'm encouraging the audience to think about, did you have a place, you know, where you felt seen or heard during your time in college? And then I'll also ask Marquita or Dr. Chamblee and Dr. Savala what their kind of third place was. So Riya and Kamali, maybe if you want to start us off first about the role of OMSE for you.
Yeah, I would love to. So from the Senate perspective, we worked very closely with OMSE and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We have put on some dialogues in regards to like social justice events that have happened, like the January 6th events, and that we just wanted to foster a place where students could come together to process their feelings and then as well as like heal together. That was our main goal with it. It was just to listen to students. There wasn't necessarily like a set of questions or an agenda that we had. It was more about creating that space where students can come, feel heard, and just talk to other people and what they're going through. And then from the other perspective, like I'm also a part of a pre-health professional fraternity, Delta Epsilon Mu, and we've also partnered with OMSE to offer trainings for our members. So I'm the professional chair, but what we've really learned is professionalism in the workplace is so much more than just learning about resume building and cover letters. It's also about how we treat others and the kind of environment we want to create in that workplace. So we have done trainings with OMSE about microaggressions in healthcare, just so our members will be more aware and how to address those type of difficult conversations and situations. We have also looked at the different resources that OMSE offers in terms of presentations about like what social justice is and how to have these kind of conversations amongst them, amongst their peers and their colleagues. And we have also looked at some of the recorded trainings that OMSE has from the summer about a variety of different social justice topics. So that way students can really pick and choose what they would like to learn more about, and so that they can just come in with a more informed perspective.
Thank you, yes.
That's awesome. Yeah, echoing what a lot of Riya said, I've always considered OMSE to be a cultural bridge as far as being able to connect with other cultures you don't necessarily have the experience or the opportunity to encounter. And, you know, Wayne State is the place for that. And for me, coming in as a freshman, I was brought into the network, a learning community. And so that space was not transactional at all. It was very like transformative. And so what that meant is it really embraced a lot of our creative outlets, a lot of our goals and objectives, and really developed leaders. And from that experience, you know, I can attest to this and many others, there's been many other student-led efforts to help in the efforts of like DEI and academic success and being able to have cultural competency as far as in the curriculum. So all these things have come out of this really to help support the efforts of postgraduate success and diversity and inclusion in the workspace, but also in the classroom with not only administrative, but student-led efforts. And that's what counts. And all these things have really allowed the university to bridge students into the community and realize like we are in the city of Detroit, and it's a special place to even talk about social justice issues or impart whatever lessons you've learned within your own major in the classroom into the community with that new mindset and that reform thinking of culture and how do we bridge that connection. So just OMSE in itself just provides opportunities for students in general, and you know, students who don't necessarily have opportunities. So it's about having the access as well. And so I believe OMSE has played a huge part in being able to just engage students and meet them where they're at. And I think that's a big portion of how students have become natural leaders from the university.
Thank you for sharing that. I know we're all very proud of being able to work with you all because, you know, in a lot of ways, you all are like seniors. And so we've had the opportunity to work with you for a number of years and see you develop and grow. So I'm going to switch the question a little bit for Marquita, or I'm sorry, Dr. Chamblee and Dr. Savala. In thinking about, like, you know, either for OMSE, what have you witnessed as it evolves into this kind of third space for students, or if you want to speak to what your third space was in college?
I mean, I think, you know, it's one of the really cool things about, you know, having been at Wayne State for this period is that, you know, OMSE didn't exist. And so to really be able to have a vision for us, for a place that becomes, and I like that becomes the third place for students it's been wonderful to watch it evolve and to see it grow and to see you all actually being in a place of outgrowing where you are in a lot of ways. And so from that perspective, it's, you know, it's a bit like being a parent. You know, you watch something grow and you watch something develop and you watch it turn into what you hope for and beyond what you hope for it to be. And so I think that's been what OMSE has been able to do. And we're talking about, you know, just in the last 5 years, you know, and the amount of growth that's happened and the amount of engagement that's come out of that office has been phenomenal for a unit that's so young. And so I really believe that over, you know, in the time to come, there'll be even greater opportunities for OMSE to do great things. And the other thing I would say is I didn't necessarily have a third place. And I've spent a fair amount of time over the last few decades helping to create third places. And I think, because I think they're so important to helping create a sense of belonging on the campus. I mean, we talk a lot about sense of belonging, but I think it's critically important to the success of our students and by extension into the success of the university that we create spaces on our campus for students, staff, and faculty where they feel a sense of connection and a sense of being valued by the institution. And so I think that's what I think about when I think about the importance of a third place.
So as I reflect on OMSE, you know, since the beginning, I mean, I think we've always tried to cultivate a space, that third space for students, certainly. A space where at times it's, you know, we've grown really quickly. We've moved to 2 different locations on campus. And even in our current space, you know, we closed our quiet study and had to make it an office because we were growing a little bit. So that's a tad bit of a little bit of a challenge, but it's a good thing, you know, in the sense that students are coming. So I see it as we continue to grow, I think more students will come in, and we will, you know, find those spaces where they can begin to have those conversations. If this was a typical day in OMSE, you'd come up and you'd see the lounge outside of our office with students. You'd see students which at our front desk at times just chatting it up, which, you know, we try to have them in other spaces just because students come in. And then we also have some computers, and you'll see each one of our computers, it has a student on it. And what's been kind of unique is that there have been students across the generations come to our space. And we didn't anticipate that. You know, Wayne State is, for a long period of time, it's, I think when a lot of people think about it, they're like, oh, it's just a commuter school. And it's just maybe a certain population of students. If you were to come into our space, depending on the date and time, I mean, you will see folks that are pillars to Detroit. And I would just say, I'm not going to throw out any names, but you know, I would just be like, thank you for coming. And they were students, and they were students at Wayne. And so, again, it's not about us imparting knowledge on students that come in, you know, sort of like, you know, we're gonna, you know, drop them down. These are other folks that have been in the community for years, also sharing their experiences. So as I think about Wayne State and OMSE, I want to create more of those, right? My background is, again, agriculture and natural resources. I want to cultivate more of those spaces like that. Does it just have to be OMSE? No, you know, I think each department, college, and unit can cultivate that space. They can cultivate that space where students can kind of come and feel accepted and feel valued. And that's all we want, right? You know, one of the highlights that I like of our work is graduation. And if you were to come to some of the graduation events for different communities, the main graduation or some of the celebratory smaller ones, they're amazing. You know, you see the family and the friends, and that's, for me, is the most rewarding, is, you know, seeing the smiles on the family when when they're, you know, whoever it would be, you know, is graduating at that time. And it could be a parent, right, graduating, and it could be a first generation college student. And so it's not really monolithic in terms of the students we serve. And as you think, and then just to wrap up the space, for me, there were a couple of third spaces that I went to on campus. And I think, you know, one was a similar space like OMSE. And that's where I sort of got to meet other people who had similar experiences as mine, and said, you know, and I saw they were seniors and I was coming in as a sophomore, you know, and they were doing it and they did it. And they were kind of giving me you know, telling me the ropes. And I think, you know, students need to see that. They need to see other people like them doing great work and, you know, going on and, you know, getting great jobs, so they can do that as well. So.
Yes, these are all great things. And the chat is, you know, is blowing up. I think we've got a good panel discussion over there. And people were calling, what are third spaces for them? One thing that I think too, when I'm hearing you all speak, is thinking about being able to just to learn in a space outside of a classroom. I think some of the things that I heard was just learning, right? And so when we think about, you know, you're learning content and kind of professional behaviors in your courses as you move through your major, you're learning more specialized skills, but places like OMSE still serve that important purpose of learning in ways that aren't necessarily specific to, you know, a public health major or neuroscience or something. It's those conversations like Kamali was alluding to, where you learn more about just people, and that leads to better leadership. And oftentimes when I'm doing work with OMSE's programming and things, I really love partnering with faculty, because I think that those out of classroom learning experiences can really enhance holistic student development. So, you know, encouraging professors to highlight our programs in their classes, hyping them up and telling students to attend them. Because, you know, for so many students, although Wayne State University is the most diverse campus in Michigan, you got to be intentional about that. You know, it's really easy to just keep hanging out with the same kinds of people. And so, oftentimes college is the most diverse place that people will find themselves in their life. When you think about your communities and, you know, where you go to school and where you work, you tend, in a lot of ways, those people are very similar to you, similar income levels, education levels, values. But when you're in college, you're immersed in just this great diversity. But I think when I think about the work that OMSE does, it's my job to try to ensure that students are taking advantage of those learning opportunities to learn beyond themselves. We talked about that discomfort and where the learning happens. So I'm really excited to see, you know, some of the things that you feel were influential, Kamali and Riya, in your growth as a leader. Go ahead.
I do want to say that, and I don't know if this is just for me, but I notice every time I go into OMSE, and this speaks to the success of OMSE, is that a pivotal component of its success has just been the staff in itself. The staff are the backbone of OMSE, and I know, like, every student has someone like their go-to person that they connect with, who just brought them into that space. Whether it's you, Dr. Hawks, or Dr. Savala, or Joseph Bradfield. Those are the key people who help with the retention factor keeping students here because they have a point person, a mentor, a coach, someone just to get them by, to guide them, help navigate through academia, and help with, even at the personal level too.
Thank you. So I know I'm watching the time. So if you do have a question, go ahead and put it into the chat and I'll make sure we can try to address that. We have one last question for our panelists, and I think this is actually one of the most interesting and difficult. So if you were going to build a perfect university, what would that look like? How would the principles of OMSE shape it? So on and so forth, build that in. And so I encourage our audience members to also, what would a perfect university look like? We have alumni from decades, like spanning decades. If you were going to build a perfect Wayne State, what would it look like?
I think in terms of like OMSE and the role of that, what I would kind of see it as where we're at now, but then also building upon it and just normalizing these conversations, like Kamali mentioned earlier. Even when things are going well, talking about these topics and getting comfortable with them. So if something does happen, we can all come together as a community and discuss like solutions and really find that like common ground and kind of get past that feelings of like uncomfortableness. So just like normalizing that and making it just like having that place where you can connect with others. We already have that with OMSE, but just building it further, expanding that community, and really getting the word out to students, because we have all these great resources, but sometimes students just don't know about them. And I think we have seen that with many of the other initiatives we worked on as well, just getting students connected to the right resources, because the Wayne State community is one of the most diverse one, and what really makes it so special is the people. And if we can connect students to the right people, I think it'll just help a lot of students.
Thank you. Other visions?
Echoing what Riya was saying, and I think first, expansion of OMSE, because OMSE serves a lot of students, but often the supply and the demand, there's often a difference there, and how best can we serve students. And every student deserves their individual time, and there's limited resources. And so with things being stretched in, I think expanding OMSE and being a more centralized breadth of a space where students can take part of all of its glory and its resources is something that would help allude to a more perfect university. But past that, I think it's the instructional, the infrastructural mindset of that these conversations are of high importance, of DEI, social justice, and always making connections in classrooms, of taking the skills you learn here and applying it to the world as for whatever work you are setting out to do, but just keeping these concepts in the forefront of your mind, and how we approach people in conversations, and learning all these things of how to navigate in different spaces that you may not be used to. So just that mindset shift that is ingrained in students, faculty, staff, administrators at all various levels.
Absolutely. I feel like you could run OMSE, Kamali. Love so many things of what you said. Other visions?
I mean, I think, I would say that, Wayne State is the most diverse, campus or whatever, in public campus in Michigan. And that is really centered on the student body, but that our faculty body is in particular is not as diverse as we'd like it to be. So at my perfect university, the faculty, staff, students, and administration would be very diverse, and I think would bring the kind of strength that true diversity does bring. And I think just a few other things that I was thinking about when I thought about this is that learning and student success is at the center of everything we do. And so even though, yes, we're a research university, et cetera, that we create an environment where learning happens without barriers. And then I think, I want to make sure that I throw a shout out to the staff, because, our staff is also very diverse, by the way. And I think sometimes, we focus on undergraduate students and faculty, and we don't spend a lot of time thinking about graduate and professional students and our staff. And our staff, in my mind, if the faculty and the students are the bricks, the staff is the mortar that keeps the whole thing built, put together. And so having a staff that feels valued and appreciated, I think, is also going to be an important part of my perfect university. And I think it would be a place that would meet the needs of all the constituencies on the campus.
I don't think I could add anything to, the only other thing I think I could probably say is that if I were to flip that question on its head a little bit and say, how do we know we don't already have a perfect university, and that we're really just dealing with the issues of society that are showing up at our front door, and that we are trying to solve those. And so that's how I would position it. But I would also say, like, if we were to have like a perfect university, I would love to see more spaces for students to kind of host meetings and do certain things that they would want to do, all together, sort of like a nice cultural space like that, where OMSE isn't too far from that, and maybe either, some of the studies programs have liaison spaces nearby, so we can sort of connect those students with them as well. But I think, there's so many ways we could go with that in terms of a perfect, if we had a perfect university. What I would want to say is that there's a lot of great folks there at the university already doing amazing work. So I would just want to elevate them all and really highlight all of the amazing things that they've done, from taking money out of their own pockets to help students, to kind of like, going way beyond in terms of helping to support our students here. So just highlighting those individuals specifically.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm really appreciating what's happening in the chat too, because I think in some ways they're kind of responding to thoughts that you all have. I don't know what a perfect university will look like, because it's like perfect to who? Because I think when I think about it from a generational perspective too, what we thought was good and great 10, 20, 30 years ago is always a moving target. So it's a hard question to answer, because it's perfect to who? Because there's always, I'm looking at the chat and people are saying, I read something that said this or that. There's always going to be some other perspective that's like, well, you could be doing it this way. So I want to thank our panelists for their thoughts and contributions to this conversation. We do have just a little bit of time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. So if you want to put them in the chat, let me see, did I miss any, Anne? I know there was kind of a waterfall effect of thoughts. But if you do have a question, I'm scrolling. Oh, yeah, OMSE, the Office of Multicultural Student Engagement. Sorry about that if we do our alphabet soup jargon. But I want to just say, I know we have about 5 minutes left. So if you're thinking of a thought-provoking question and it's taking a moment to type it out, I'll just say, I encourage people to check out the Office of Multicultural Student Engagement's website. We do put some events on there. So if you're interested in seeing what's going on, I'll put it in the chat. But how OMSE became popular for students. Oh, can we talk about that? Maybe Riya or Kamali, do you want to talk about maybe how OMSE, if it has become, or how it has become popular with students? I don't know if we're popular. Never been a cool kid.
I would say a lot of what the student work that comes out of OMSE really drives the popularity, because we have like organizations like the Brotherhood or network events, or different activities in collaboration with the staff at OMSE. They're big celebratory events because we're celebrating culture, and we like to just, bring a lot of people into the fold. And so that in itself is just an attracting space, and people see this and say, hey, they're doing this and it looks fun, and let me join in. Or it's often, communication based or word of mouth. Hey, I'm doing this, come along with me, let's check it out together. So the space kind of fosters that community building aspect. And so I think that's what has alluded to a lot of the growth and popularity.
Yeah, I agree with Kamali, and I think just having those events every month, and as well as partnering with different student organizations to host different events and work on different initiatives together, I think it kind of has like spread more of the word. And I think now more than ever, many students want to learn about social justice and how they can get involved. So they're actively seeking out resources and ways to get involved. So I think that's why more people are engaged now.
Well, I've been monitoring the chat. I don't see any other questions. So once again, I'll just say thank you to our panelists, Dr. Chamblee, Dr. Savala, Kamali, and Riya. If I can have our audience give a virtual round of applause. I know I have really enjoyed this conversation. I always love talking just with other people in any type of setting. But, it's my hope that we can continue, again, to have these spaces where we can talk about some of these issues, just thoughts where maybe it's not coming up in classes, maybe it's not coming up at your house, but nonetheless, these conversations are important. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Peter so he can close us out. And again, thank you so much for having us.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Hawks. I just want to say thank you as well to Dr. Hawks and our entire panel. I think this conversation today was incredibly important. It was also inspiring, and I think I'll be stuck on Dr. Savala's, one of his metaphors at least, for quite a while, that being, cultivating our diversity garden. There are lots of ways that we at Wayne State cultivate that garden, and I want to invite all of you to help us do that. One way that we can do that and continue to do that is by making a gift. And today is Wayne State's Giving Day. So if you're inspired by this work and want to help us continue to strengthen it, I invite you to visit givingday.wayne.edu and take a look at some of the really important initiatives and programs that you can support today and every day. So with that, on behalf of the Alumni Association, I just want to say thank you again to everyone who participated today, and we will see you again soon. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.